Hello, and welcome to Roll20 Tips and Tricks. I'm Keith Curtis. I'm a player on Roll20, as well as a game master and a moderator on the Roll20 forums. However, this video series is in no way officially connected with Roll20. Now, I've been using Roll20 for a number of years, and a lot of people have helped me to understand how this browser-based software could help me renew my love of tabletop role-playing. In that spirit, I've decided to create a series of tips and tricks videos to help new players avoid some common stumbling blocks and maybe pass on some techniques to make your role-playing games run more smoothly. For the most part, I will be creating these videos with the free level non-subscribing member in mind, since this is how most people originally come to the site. As time goes on, I do plan to add videos on subscriber level perks or to include some content that shows how they can be used to improve your gameplay experience. This first video will address one of the most common difficulties that new players stumble over, namely, how to link tokens with journals. Now, a token is any graphic on the Roll20 tabletop that represents a character. If you're more used to traditional tabletop RPGs, you probably use the word miniature or mini. Now, a journal is, in this case, another way to refer to a character sheet, or a collection of attributes that represents a character. Whereas most role-playing games make a distinction between player characters and non-player characters, Roll20 divides them up a little differently. Roll20 refers to tokens as either representing characters or mooks. Now, a character is any journal that represents an individual. Well, this could be a player character, of course, but it could also represent a specific non-player character. A mook represents a class of non-player character that are broadly the same, but may only differentiate by their number of current hit points, their choice of weapon, or some other trivial matter, but by and large, they are otherwise roughly identical. Now, some systems refer to them as mooks or minions or extras. Roll20 chooses to call them mooks. For example, within the realm of Dungeons & Dragons, a vampire spawn is a mook. They're all pretty much the same. Stradfran Zarevich is a character. In Star Wars, stormtroopers are mooks, while Captain Phasma is a character. Now, why is this distinction important? Because every character you add to your campaign is loaded into your browser's memory when you start your game. A lot of characters can lead to slow performance. We'll talk about how to improve performance in a later video. So if your players are going to be fighting 20 goblins, the last thing you want is to clog your system with 20 individual goblin character sheets that are almost completely redundant. So, you use only one goblin character sheet, and you set up your goblin tokens as mooks. Now we're going to walk through these steps one by one. I'm going to be using Dungeons & Dragons for this example, since it's the 800-pound gorilla of the role-playing game world. Naturally, to link a token to a journal, I'm going to need at least two things: a piece of artwork to use as a token, and a journal that is set up to use as a character sheet. In the case of Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Dungeon World, and at the time of this video, Burn Bright, Roll20 has done a lot of the work for you. All of these systems have an online resource called an SRD, or System Reference Document, that contains freely usable versions of much of their game content. Today, we're going to be using a goblin, one of the most common enemies faced by fantasy gamers. Alright. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to need is a journal or character sheet that represents the goblins, and this will need to have hit points and other vital statistics such as armor class, movement, weapons, that sort of thing. Now, I could go to my compendium and just drag out a goblin. I've already got a goblin set up here in my search. For instance, I can type in goblin, and goblin will come up. However, since I do have the monster manual, and you can see to the right of the goblin entry at the very end, it says MM1, Monster Manual 1. If I were to drag that out, I would get a character sheet that already has a token attached to it. That's because I've purchased the monster manual. We want to go from as if you were just coming to Roll20 for the first time, you haven't purchased any content yet. So I have a generic goblin character sheet that I have created here. I'm going to open it up, and you will see that it is set up to be a goblin as written in the monster manual. There's nothing special about this. If you fight 20 of these, they're all going to be pretty much the same. So let's go ahead and close that. Now I want to connect this to a character sheet. For instance, if I pull this onto the board right now, I'm going to get a generic blue person icon. It has nothing linked in the bars. And if we were to double click and open up the edit token screen, we can see that although it does represent the goblin character, it's not set up for roleplay. There is nothing in the bars that indicates hit points, movement, anything like that. Nothing useful. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. I do want a goblin miniature. So I'm going to go into my art library, and I am going to type in goblin. And I'm going to pull out just this first entry that comes up here. This is a goblin that I previously uploaded to my library. There will be some tokens that you can find automatically, and you can also find a whole bunch of tokens in the marketplace and quite a few through online searches. I'm going to pull this onto my board. I'm going to put it a little bit off to the left here because I'm going to be using this right-hand side later on to show some things about the character. And right now, as you can see, this is pretty much like the one I just dragged out. There's nothing in the bars, and this goblin is a generic token. If you look under that first entry, represents character, it says none/generic token. So the first thing I want to do is I want to link this to the journal entry. So I'm going to type in or choose from the characters that I have available, goblin. So now it represents goblin. It automatically fills the name in for you. Since you're a free user, if you're going to be pulling out a lot of goblins, you'll probably want to change the names of individual goblin tokens you pull out to Goblin 1, Goblin 2, Goblin 3, or there are ways that you can indicate which goblin you're talking about on the board. The first thing we need to do is we need to link the tokens bars to its journals attributes. And what that means is we want to link the bar or bubble that appears when you select the token. Let's go ahead and reselect that token to make those reappear, so that they indicate values on the character sheet. Now the first thing you'll notice is that bar 1, which is green in this case, is actually in the middle of the token. And bar 2 is on the right, and bar 3 is all the way over on the left. This is one of the first things that people coming to Roll20 wonder, what the heck is going on here? Well, historically, there used to be only one bubble, and people got used to using that for hit points. So bar 1 was used for hit points. People did not want to completely redo thousands of existing games, so bar 1 remained the primary bar, but was kept in the middle just because it was what people were used to. All right, so let's start linking bubbles or bars to this character sheet. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to use the recommended bar 1 for hit points. So I simply click on the linking icon and I choose HP, and I'm going to go ahead and make that full hit points. You'll notice that the token over here has 7 hit points now, and his bar is at full. The green bar indicating the green bubble is at 7 out of 7, so he's full. As he gets reduced in hit points, let's say that he now has 2 hit points, you'll see that he looks wounded. All right, pretty basic stuff. So now let's link bar 2. Roll20 recommends bar 2 for armor class, but again, you can use it for whatever you want. Linking to the Goblin character sheet, Goblins have an armor class of 12. That comes directly off the character sheet. All your Goblins are probably going to have the same armor class. Nothing needs to be done there. And then third, movement. So let's go ahead and click on that, and movement in Roll20 is called speed, and that will fill in the Goblin speed, or it would if he was a player character. I've forgotten that NPC speed is the characteristic we want to use for non-player characters. Now, there's an awful lot more we could fill in here, but that's all we really need to use at the moment. We're not going to be meddling with auras, which are colored shapes that follow the character around. We do, however, want the players to be able to see the name of this goblin. So over here on the left-hand side of the advanced portion of the token editor, we have player permissions. We do want them to see the token name, and we do not want them to see bar 1. We're not going to want them to see the hit points of individual goblins. That's a matter of play style. Some game masters are fine with the player seeing who is wounded and by how much. Some want to keep that as a surprise. You'll notice that the nameplate is not showing up on the token right now. If we go back to the basic settings and we click show nameplate, that indicates that the nameplate will be shown. Let's click that one more time and toggle it. Might only happen when we save changes. All right, and you'll see that our bars, however, are filled in. So let's go ahead and close that. And now our nameplate has appeared. Now if we go back to our journal and we drag it out, what? We've still got that little blue person? We don't want that. We just set up this whole goblin over here. What's going on? Well, what is going on is that although we have set up this individual token, this guy right here, to represent a goblin and given him all the stats and linking he needs, we have not yet told the goblin character sheet that every time I want to drag out a goblin, I want this token. Right now, it's still pulling out the individual token. So let's open up the goblin character sheet. We'll click edit. And down here on the left-hand side, we have avatar at the top, and then just below that, default token optional. We want to use this token that we have set up. So I'm going to click select, use selected token, and save changes. And I'll close that character sheet. And now when I pull out that goblin, I'm going to get a goblin. It is all set up just like this goblin over here. Now, let's say that this goblin takes 5 points of damage. And in Roll20, you can simply click on the bubble, and if he's taken 5 points of damage, you can type -5, and it will do the math for you, giving him 2 hit points. But see what's happened here? Both of these goblins have now taken 2 hit points. What's going on? Well, what's going on is that we have not done the very last step we need to do in our setup. Right now, each goblin token represents all the values that are on the goblin character sheet. And that's fine for things like hit points, that's fine for things like armor class or movement that generally are static and don't change from token to token. Hit points, however, are variable. So let's go ahead and make those back up to maximum. And we want to make one change to our goblin token. We want to tell it, instead of linking to hit points, and this is a step that you would normally do when we were doing our setup, I purposefully omitted it just to show what would happen if you didn't. Let's go back and change that to none. Now, the armor class is read from the character sheet. The speed is read from the character sheet. However, bar 1 doesn't represent anything on the sheet. It just has a maximum value of 7 and a current value of 7. Or reading left from right, current value of 7, maximum value of 7. So that's different from goblin to goblin. So now if I change a goblin, if I change this goblin's hit points, say to 2, this goblin stays the same. Now, one more thing to catch. If I pull out a fresh goblin and I change his hit points to 2, it's still changing every goblin. What happened? We didn't do the last step you always need to do whenever setting up a token. So let's go ahead and delete these guys. Open up our character sheet. Go to Edit. Take our sample goblin back up to 7. What happened is that we did not tell it to use our edited token that we just did, where we unlinked the hit points, as our new default token. It was still using the last default token that we had set up for that character sheet. So the last thing you want to do is you want to remove that default token, and with this new edited one, use that as our selected token. And now when we drag, let's go ahead and close that character sheet. Now when we drag a goblin out onto the field, let's go ahead and open him up. We'll see that he is no longer linked to the hit points there in bar 1. It's just a 7 and a 7. So now if I change this goblin to 2 hit points, he's got 2 hit points. The first goblin still has 7. If you are creating a character, somebody who is not a mook, you would keep that hit point linked so that every time you dragged it out, you would get a token that represents the actual number of hit points that that character has on their character sheet. That's important because if you have a character token that is on one map and you want to move them to another or drag out a new copy onto that new map, you want them to have that character's current hit points, not hit points that are only associated with the token. So that's it. I'll be having some more videos in the future, but for right now, that is the proper and recommended way to link tokens to journals so that your characters will have their own tokens and each mook will have a token that indicates its own current number of hit points. Thanks. This has been Keith Curtis.